This podcast is presented by Castrol Edge Euro, the #1 brand recommended by technicians in Europe. Did you know that almost 50% of European vehicles in Canada come factory filled with Edge Euro? Offer better oil. Offer your customer Castrol Edge Euro. Questions? Contact your local auto parts distributor, or Wakefield Territory Sales Manager, or customer service at 1-800-268-5339. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Ross. Now, the issue of scrap tires has been really weighing on the industry in Ontario. It's been 9 months now, at least. While there have been some developments, it's not really coming to solutions right now. Shops continue to have tires piling up and have difficulty getting them picked up and taken into the recycling. There's a bunch of stuff in the middle going on. So to help everybody understand how we got here and what's happening now is Adam Moffatt. He's the executive director of the Ontario Tire Dealers Association. Welcome to the podcast, Adam.
Hey, good morning, Andrew. Thanks for having me again.
Again, right? As I talked before, here we still are, or here we are again. First of all, where are we at and how did we get here? I guess, how is this system supposed to work for those who maybe haven't been following along?
Yeah, so essentially, Ontario has a regulation, and the regulation holds the tire producers, those who are importing the tires into the province, responsible for managing the collection and recycling of these tires. And typically, the producers hire what we call producer responsibility organizations, or pros, who set up the collection networks. And under the regulation, and based on some recent communications from the MECP, the Ministry of the Environment, essentially all tires in the province, as they become available, are supposed to be collected and recycled. That's the simple view of it. Is as they become available, they're supposed to be picked up and recycled.
But but something's changed over the last while, and that has resulted in a situation where, again, anybody who's a shop in Ontario knows that it's just not happening the way it used to. But something changed to make that to get us to where we are now, though, right?
Yeah, and it's a big but. So what we saw last year in 2025 was the requirements under the regulations were modified, and a few of the requirements became a blended requirement, and ultimately it lowered the threshold, or the recycling responsibilities. So we previously had targets that were set at roughly 85%. So as tires were brought into the province, the producers had an obligation to collect and recycle 85% of those tires by weight. And that was against the 3-year rolling average that gets established based on their importation history. And last year, one of the main contributing factors we saw was that target was lowered to a 65% threshold. And as the year progressed, and we talked last time, as we got through the year, we started getting warnings from the pro organizations that, hey, we're getting close to hitting these thresholds, and we're not sure how activity will progress at that point in time. And as we saw unfold last year around August, September, some of the pros started scaling back. We saw a pro stop performing collections while others were trying to collect an abundance of tires. But ultimately, by the end of the year, we found ourselves in a position where I would say a good majority of the tire shops in the province had large stockpiles of tires, some ranging from a couple of hundred to a couple of thousand. Some large stockpiles emerged across the province with hundreds of thousands of tires. And I think we were all looking, I think I said this to you, we were looking at the calendar, hoping when the year turned over and the targets reestablished themselves, that we would start seeing more improved collections. And unfortunately, we didn't see that. I would say since that point we last spoke till today, we've actually seen further degradation of the system. And now we're in a position not only where we're seeing the pros scaling back their collection efforts to meet, minimum targets, or maybe a little bit above minimum targets, but far from the actual generation of tires. But we're seeing haulers who are in the business that are going out of business right now because they're not being provided with enough quota to pick up tires. We're seeing backlogs again at tire shops, and the processing facilities in Ontario are suffering right now as well, because you have a processing site that's designed to shred and recycle 6 million tires, and you're only being provided with 3 to 4. Awfully hard to make the economics work on that situation. So yeah, we're in a equally bad spot we were last year, and unfortunately, in the last 9 months, we haven't seen really any improvement to the system.
Yeah, and just for one of the things that you sort of didn't exactly touch on, but there's a fee with every tire
Yes.
sold here that's supposed to go to pay for this, right? And so really, it's kind of money at the core of this. The folks in the middle between where between the shops and other used tire collectors and the recyclers, uh, they're paid for a certain amount of tires based on the quota, right? And
Yeah,
when they
exactly.
reach that, I guess the money stops.
Well, and essentially that's one of the main issues we have is so the producers and the pros charge the producers for the tire recycling. They have some set fees, and then the producers carry those fees down through the retail chain. So they hit the distributors, they hit the retailers, and ultimately it hits the consumer who pays the fee at the end of the day. Those fees are absolutely, as you said, they're meant to fund the system to ensure that tires are recycled and tires are picked up. And one of the struggles is, I think, from the pro side of things, is that with the targets being set as low as they are, they can only charge so much money for the tires to be, they can only charge so much money back to the producers. And, one of the main gruffs that the pros have is that there's not enough money in the system to fund all their recycling. One of our challenges, though, and we like to push back on, is to say, but you're charging on every brand new tire that comes into the province. So if you're charging on a new tire coming into the province, you should be, providing service for the tires as they leave and exit that system. And this is where things get a little bit strange, Andrew, because the fee methodology, the setting of the fees and the application of the fees is outside of the regulation. So that's left to the pros and the producers to figure out and work out. Whereas the regulation itself just says this is what you're responsible for, but you need to figure everything out around that. So even the fee methodologies between the various pros we have in the province, they're all structured very different. So it's very hard to understand how they're collecting the money and what they're doing with the money. Some of the pros collect on a 3-year rolling average. Some of the pros collect on what's being imported into the province today. But to the consumers and the tire shops in the province, we're paying on every single tire that we're purchasing right now. So as we like to say, if we're paying for recycling services on all the tires, we should be receiving recycling services on all those tires.
Right, right. So and clearly it's not happening. And
Yeah.
for the folks out there who are in Ontario shops and really understand this, and I apologize for us kind of going over some of this ground. You'll understand, I think, a lot of it, or maybe your understanding of the issue is simply that you keep calling and nobody's coming. And you're in a situation where maybe you end up having to haul to like a local uh, transfer station, and pay extra, basically, pay
Yeah.
again to have these tires just off your lot because at some point you run out of space, right? And you want it to be safe and all these good things, right? And you certainly don't want. We have heard and we have spoken a little bit about this between our last podcast and this podcast about sort of some gray market players too who are maybe well we don't always know, right? We don't know. Maybe they're
Yeah.
picking up the tires. We don't necessarily always know where they're bringing them. Maybe they're dealing with them in a responsible way, but into this vacuum can potentially flow, bad actors too, right?
Yeah, and there's a couple of things to actually unload there, what you had said, Andrew. So one of them is we are also working with other associations, municipal associations, recycling associations. And one of the things that's happening right now is we're seeing more and more municipalities having to put their hand up and saying, hey, we have to stop the flow of tires into the municipal sites because tire dealers and everybody who's accumulating these tires have been delivering these to municipal sites, and even the municipal sites are not able to get appropriate collections. So we're dealing with one in Northern Ontario right now that the whole area had lost tire collections, and all of the tire shops and the automotive shops have been bringing tires, and the municipal landfill site now has about 20 to 25,000 tires on it. They've
Right.
had to stop accepting the flow of tires, and the tire shops in that area are now backlogging. So it's a vicious circle where a shop may be able to take their tires to the municipal site, but we're not actually recycling those tires. We're just I like to say we're transferring the problem from one property to another property.
Right.
And to your point about the black market, we are seeing this today. We are working with our members of the association and the industry at large to say, look, you may be faced with having to pay additional fees to have those tires recycled. We understand some of the processors are saying, hey, we can take the tires, but we need the money for them. And they're working with haulers. And in some of those cases, we're saying, yeah, you know what, those are legitimate channels. If you need to do that, make sure you understand the costing impact of your business. Those fees may get carried on to the consumer as additional fees. But what we're seeing right now is the emergence of, scrupulous people calling themselves haulers, showing up, quoting really ridiculous cheap pricing, and the collection sites are saying, "Great, I can get rid of my tires," and they're going to non-approved haulers who are dumping these. We're not 100% sure. We did locate a barn not terribly far away from one collection site that had about 600 tires in it, and a hauler was, and I use the term hauler loosely. They're not a hauler in terms of somebody that we typically work with, but a scrupulous individual was charging to pick up tires, pretending to be a hauler, and dumping them in a barn. And the problem is, I think we're going to see more of this behavior occurring, especially as people become more aware that, hey, there is an issue, and hey, I probably can take advantage of this issue right now.
Right, right. Yeah, just opportunists, right? And
Absolutely.
opportunists with a steak truck or whatever, and they can say, I can take your 50 tires, I
Absolutely.
can take
And
your
at the
100
end of the
tires.
day, this is going to hurt the consumers more than it's going to hurt anybody because, now we've got to have special cleanups and who pays for that. And now we've got to have,
I was
these are
just
all
going to
things
say,
that,
yeah. I mean, all of these places at some point, and we don't always know. I mean, it's a big province, and there are lots of places to hide things. Even when we ended up here. We're based in Sudbury, and so not too far in the general greater Sudbury area, as they say, was about 400,000 tires in a
yeah,
collection facility that was not supposed to have them. And you know, this happened, and this happened fast, right? And
absolutely.
it's hard to hide 400 hard to hide 400,000 tires, but you can hide hundreds of tires in many barns, many abandoned places, fields, forests. I mean, who knows? People just dump them on the side of the road. I've seen them, four, five, six tires, 10 tires here and there, everywhere, right? And
Well,
of
the
course,
easiest
anybody,
place to hide them is at tire shops, right?
yeah,
So you just simply don't pick up the tires, and people view tires at a tire shop and think, "Hey, this is normal course of business." But when they look behind the building and there's 2,000 tires sitting back there, now you multiply that by 8,000 facilities in the province who are generating tires. Hide them in plain sight is what we're seeing right now.
right, right, and not to be alarmist, but
Yep.
as I feel compelled to mention that many years ago, a quarter century ago, I guess now, or is it more maybe?
Yeah.
We had a terrible situation with the Hagersville tire fire.
Yeah.
Now that was millions of tires, and it was uh, the product of arson that
Yes.
started it. There were other issues for sure, but we had millions, a million and a half tires or something burned for a long, long time, which is why we have these regulations now and why we have this system now, right? So again, not being alarmist, but boy, we sure don't want 1,000 or 2,000 mini Hagersville situations scattered throughout the province that are there for the lighting, for kids
Yeah.
or whoever, right? Or just people who just want to do it, and it's just not a great situation all around. Now, there hasn't been much change, and nothing's actually changed, but the province has proposed some changes. So maybe you could get listeners up to speed on what the province has proposed, and maybe what the position is of the OTDA and tire dealers in Ontario on those proposals, and maybe some other options that you would like them to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. So back in April, the MECP, the minister's office, released some proposed amendments, and those proposed amendments really were designed to, one, ensure that all of the tires in the province are picked up and recycled, and then to put some control measures in place to make sure that those tires can't simply be picked up and stockpiled somewhere, that they have to be processed, they have to go through the system, and a few other measures to try to help button up and tighten things up. So we're happy to see the proposal come out. We're happy to see that the ministry is engaging. The trouble that I have is a lot of what we're seeing, we're concerned it's more band-aids than it is solutions. So one of the things that the proposals don't address is the targets. There's no discussion about raising the targets right away. And really, at the end of the day, raising the targets to a higher level is going to drive more performance in the system. It's also going to make it easier for the pros to appropriately bill back the producers and have those funds flow back down through the retail channel. So one of the main concessions they brought in is essentially they're trying to set up a call-in service. So
Right.
in the province, we technically have a two-tier system. So we have what we call in-network collection sites. So these are collection sites that the pros have agreed to pick up from, and they've provided their list to the RPRA, the registrar, and said these are the sites we'll pick up from. And then we have all of the other sites, which is just about as many, if not a few more, that are deemed not in network. And those are the sites that don't really have a viable path or a way to have tires collected. So what the proposed changes is that, and it's very high level, so we don't have all the details, but effectively, we believe the RPRA would be responsible for setting up a call-in number. So if you need tires picked up, you would call into this number, and the RPRA would do one of two things. We think they would, one, they would look at the registry and say, hey, this is where you're registered, call them. Or two, hey, you're not registered. And then there would be some kind of methodology where the RPRA would disperse those calls back to the various pros who would give them to the haulers who would drive out and perform services.
Right.
So one of the struggles that we have with this whole idea is we still don't believe that there should be a two-tier system. If you're a tire shop or the normal course of your business, you generate waste tires, you should just be deemed in network. You should be qualified for pickups. You shouldn't be deemed out of network and have to have special considerations. When you look at the call-in service, we're really worried about a couple of things. So one is the administrative burden that this is going to bring on. This is a whole nother facet to the RPRA. This means there's going to be more expense, there's going to be more costing. What methodologies are they going to use to ensure that the tires are picked up? How do they decide which pro picks them up? And then how do the pros decide which haulers pick them up? It's a confusing system that we don't believe needs to be there. If we just deem everybody in network and that the provincial government or the MECP enforces that the tires are picked up as they become available, as they say is required. So the other challenge from a tire dealer's perspective, or just a collection site in general, is generally when a contractor comes onto your property, you always validate WSIB coverage, you validate liability insurance, and you typically have to go through the processes and policies of your site and your operation before any work is conducted. And, most tire dealers in the province of Ontario and collection sites, they have an established relationship with a hauler, somebody who's serviced them for 5, 10, 15 years. They have this information, they have a relationship. So the idea that a tire dealer or a collection site will have to call the RPRA,
Right.
the RPRA will arbitrarily, assign a pro, the pro will assign a hauler, and then an unknown hauler will show up to your facility. You have never validated they're insured, they have WSIB, you have to go through the process every time when they come in. And then you're still deemed out of network. So 2 weeks later, you need another pickup. You're going to call and you're going to go through the whole system and you might get another hauler showing up and another hauler. So even from the haulers perspective, we deal with a lot of haulers in the association, and they're saying, look, we have established routes. Like, they're going to assign a new collector to me. I don't know if I have the equipment. I don't know how big of a truck I can go in with. I don't know what type of tires they have. So nobody
Right.
is particularly interested in this process. And we put forth a lot of comments on that, recommending, maybe if there's a call-in service, those call-ins should just be for very limited collection sites, those who need one or two pickups a year, those who don't normally generate tires, but certainly not for the masses.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense as you say. A service provider for any business, you get to know, how to operate with that business. You know where the different people are. You get to know the people. You get to know where they store things. If you're in the tire collection business, you'll know where to go. Some of these trusted haulers. I mean, they might even have a key to the gated area, right? So they're like,
Absolutely.
hey, let's come and get them
100%.
after hours or whatever, and that's their deal. And because they're trusted and they know where they're going, and they're one of the service providers for that business. And instead now you're putting it into the random bingo ball collection thing of who's available and who are they going and what's going, and not knowing, and even if everybody is being completely scrupulous in all of the things they do and totally above board, they're still showing up at a facility, at a shop that they're not familiar with, dealing with people they're not familiar with, and vice versa. And where do I go? Where do I put my truck? How do I do this? And
Yep.
you can't bring your truck this way, or you can't come on a Tuesday at 10 because everybody knows that that's when our fleet guys come in, or like whatever. I mean, all of these things, right? So Yeah.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, the industry should be governing the industry, right? So tire haulers form relationships with collectors, allow them to form those relationships. To your point, I was a former tire hauler many years ago with my family's business. We had keys to hundreds of locations, and we would go in after hours because they were too busy during the daytime because they didn't have the too many cars in the lot. They didn't want large trucks driving through. So we're really pushing back to say, one, we got to get rid of this two-tier system. We can't, you can't arbitrarily decide that a tire dealer is not in the network because you had a bad day that day. Like that's just not right. And if you're going to have a call-in service, I hope you see people answering those calls. So what we don't want to see is a continued network where we have two definitions, in network and out of network. If you're generating tires as a normal part of your business, you should be expecting to receive normal recycling. Why they have to call in through a special service and wait the timelines and call in every other week when they need to pick up is just kind of beyond me. So outside of that, there are some positive things they're proposing. So there's some measures being put in place to ensure that when tires are collected, they're not just warehoused and stockpiled, that they have to flow through the system, they have to be recycled. And they're also looking at measures to ensure that the pros themselves also have to come together to work. They all have to work together to make this system function. So there's some positive in there, but there's definitely a lot of room for improvement as well.
Right, right. Yeah, it sounds like, and it does very much sound like, a bit of left hand and right hand not kind of cooperating too in a lot of the situation that we've had. The Target on one side, I did see, a comment from looked like a hauler on some recent posts on social saying, well, I'm just sitting at home this week because I've got my quota, you know, and
Yeah. And
that's
and
the
that's
reality
that's
in
a
the
real
ground.
life
That's the
struggle.
reality of it, right? Like he's,
It is. You have to remember that the haulers, other than a very few haulers, most of these haulers are small independent businesses. These are, the owner operator is out in a truck picking up tires. They're trying to put food on their table. These are not companies that have billion-dollar bankrolls and millions of dollars worth of investors behind them. These are salt of the earth people who are out there grinding out a living. And, so some of the comments you mentioned, I read that one this morning too about sitting out next week. The reality is that individual had three trucks on the road 6 months ago. And today he's got one truck and he's in the truck, and that truck can only work 4 days a week. So the issues we're facing here are not structural in nature. We have the infrastructure today. It's regulatory. It's limitations based on the regulations. It's limitations based on how producers and pros are working within the regulation. And really, to correct these situations, you have to redefine the regulation. You have to increase targets. These
yeah,
poor haulers, we're aware of at least seven haulers who left the industry at this point in time. I'm dealing with another group of haulers who is on the verge of having to leave. And, what does this mean for us long term? If we don't have these viable changes to the regulation come in quicker timing, we are going to lose infrastructure that's required. And I'll be honest with you, Andrew, if you were thinking about becoming a hauler today, watching all of the strife that's going on and hearing that haulers have gone bankrupt and left the industry, would you even invest $50 in opening a hauling business 6 months from now?
right.
So we're pushing back to the authorities as well to say, you need to react quickly. I mean, these people are leaving, and there's no guarantees that anybody's going to come back. You think of a tire processing plant. Your average tire processing plant, you're a 25 to $35 million investment. Nobody is looking at Ontario right now and thinking, I'm going to open a tire recycling plant in that province. Everything is going smooth over there.
Right,
If we
right,
lose one of our existing processors, that capacity is going to be gone for quite a while.
right. Yeah. I mean, and just for, I mean, stating the obvious for those who know, and as you allude to, if hauling capacity drops in the province, that's not just a matter of changing a regulation and then flicking a switch and having it come back again. That's gone at least for a while,
Yeah.
until people are confident that there is going to, so there are going to be under capacity regardless of what happens if we get to that situation. Likewise with recycling facilities, if one closes and that business sells off its equipment, it's
Right.
that capacity is
It's
gone
gone.
for years until somebody says, okay, well now the flow is consistent and it's reliable, and we can get back on with a viable business case, right? And it probably at the risk of stepping into the political landscape here, but this is what it is, right? I mean, it's regulatory landscape. There's politics. We in Ontario have a government that really, really pushes itself as being pro-business.
Yes.
Open for business, as I think is what is on our license plates.
Yep.
Right.
The simplest way to look at it is this. Every hauler in the province services a couple of hundred to a couple of thousand. The larger haulers service thousands of collection sites. The average hauler probably services between 350 and 550 sites. So today, probably half of the collection sites in the province are struggling to get tires picked up. So every single time one of these haulers has to walk away from the business, that's another 3, 4, 500 collection sites that are now struggling, because it's not like any other hauler can just step up and say, we'll take those tires. Well, will you? Do you have the quota available? Are you permitted to do so? Disappearing infrastructure is not going to be absorbed at this point in time. It's going to leave more and more, risk factor out there for collection sites in the province. It's a scary scenario.
It is. And as you mentioned, I can't remember if we talked about it at the beginning of the podcast or just before we got on, those shops, which are, as a stopgap relying on municipal collection sites, transfer sites, are running up against that too, right? Some of those sites are saying, no, we have 25,000 tires here. We can't take anymore. We don't have capacity for these, and they're not getting picked up and moved to the recycling, facilities. So that's, there really is, no halfway solution to this. It all has to work together, right? And
it does. And, at the end of the day, if this is strictly because of the targets, then the provincial government needs to increase the targets. If we have issues with the pros not cooperatively working with each other, then the government needs to step in and put measures in place to make sure that they do. If this is a money issue, then let's just come out and say that this is a money issue, and let's figure out what the actual cost to the consumers needs to be for recycling tires. But we can't just keep band-aiding, what we're doing today, and we can't just watch the system degrade further and further than it is. So every time I get a phone call from a collectors group, or a collector in particular saying, "Wow, we were just totally removed from the system. We don't even know what to do now," and I'm going, "Why? Why are we doing this?" Right? So we just need answers. And tire dealers and collection sites, none of us are in the business of making scrap tires, right? Scrap tires is an offshoot of what we're doing, and we just want to focus in on whether we're repairing cars, dismantling vehicles, or replacing tires. That's our core business, and that's what we need to focus in on. We shouldn't be having to deal with municipalities and insurance companies and landlords who are threatening to evict, threatening to cancel insurance because of a stockpile of tires that, in all fairness, the retailer and the consumer of that retailer have paid to be recycled, yet there's no services being provided. So
right.
It's a tough one to make sense of.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I certainly, the solutions seem kind of obvious. Make sure they're picked up and brought to recyclers, but clearly there's a disconnect here. Before we close, what should shops do? What can they do to help drive solutions forward on this?
So I think the answer to that is very similar to what we talked about in the fall. Number one is, we're reaching out to shops constantly through communications to say, hey, make sure you keep us at the Ontario Tire Dealers Association up to date on the status of your site. Send us the information, send us photos of your piles of tires. We are compiling logs, and we are sending these logs into the ministry and the RPRA on a regular basis. And we're trying to make sure that they're alerted to understand how big the problem is. We also highly encourage everybody, if you haven't, make sure you reach out to your local MPP. We've been working with several MPPs, which has been fantastic over the last couple of weeks and months. They've been raising the issues for us and advocating for us. But we need to continue with that movement. We need to continue to have tire shops reaching out. We also encourage them to reach out to the ministry and reach out to the RPRA. And please send me an email and let me know if you need that contact information. But we need thousands of people need to be screaming on this subject. Otherwise, it's going to get swept under the rug like we saw after January of last year. And we can't have that happen again, Andrew. One of the big scares that we have right now is when we went into the fall of last year, most tire dealers did not have a surplus of tires already built up. So we built it all up during the fall. The challenge we have right now into the spring season is we're going into the season with a surplus of tires already sitting there, which means we're going to come out of the spring with a mountain of tires. And we're really only 4 months away from the kickoff of the fall season. When the ministry announces what these proposed changes are, it's probably going to be 30, 60, 90, 120-day adjustment period. Processes have to be set up. We might be faced with going into the fall season with hundreds, if not thousands, of tires at these tire dealers and collection sites already. And I don't know how you manage at that point in time. This industry is very, I like to say it's a roller coaster. We have ups and we have downs, and we have peaks and we have valleys. And the thought of going into a peak season with a surplus of tires is scary, because while the infrastructure is there to process these tires, the infrastructure also maximizes out, right? And we have a very systematic industry that pulls tires through. So the idea of going into the fall with potentially millions of tires of backlog in a time when we generate some excess is just that's scary for anybody wondering. You're going to go into the fall with 1,000 tires at a tire shop who's going to generate another 4,000 tires, but the sector can only pick up 2,000 tires because of the restraints on the capacity. So
Right.
we're urging
The
everybody.
math gets pretty scary, right? So
It is. So if you're an affected tire shop, municipality, automotive shop, if you're generating tires and they're not being picked up, let us know, reach out to the government, start screaming from the hilltops, because it's a scary thought.
scary, scary stuff. All right, Adam, thank you so much again for the time. I hope that the next time we talk, we can talk about some of the other great stuff that OTDA does, from the
Absolutely.
training programs and all these other things you got going on. But this is a super important issue for the health and viability of the industry and community positioning too, right? So again, thanks again, Adam. Thanks everyone else for listening. We'll put the contact information for Adam and the OTDA in the show notes. If you have an issue or a question, go there, send him an email. He will respond. I have heard. Responsive guy. So again, Adam, thanks very much. Thanks everyone for listening, and take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and good Lord willing, everything will work out all right.
You're listening to the Great Canadian Aftermarket Podcast, brought to you by the publishers of Indie Garage and Jobber Nation. Connect with us online at indiegarage.ca and jobbernation.ca, a brand of Chat Integrated Media.